All right, so welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going down a bit of a YouTube rabbit hole, checking
Mhm.
out this channel called Liberation Y.
Oh, okay.
And they've got some pretty um, strong opinions about marriage, you could say.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're basically saying it's like rigged, you know, benefits women and the state, but leaves men kind of screwed.
That's a bold statement.
Yeah, it gets even wilder. They even compare marriage to like a cult.
A cult. Seriously.
Seriously.
Yeah.
But before we dismiss them as just, another bunch of angry internet dudes, let's actually, break down their arguments, see if there's anything there.
Sounds like a plan.
Cool. So why don't you tell us a bit about what makes this liberation why so, I don't know, interesting?
Well, I think what makes them so interesting is that, even though they can be kind of extreme in how they say things, they do bring up some points about like historical power imbalances in marriage.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, it wasn't that long ago when women couldn't even own property or have their own bank accounts, right? So marriage was pretty much their only way to be financially secure.
Makes sense.
And, I think those echoes from the past still kind of like influence how we view marriage today, even if we don't realize it.
That's a good point. So how does all that tie into what Liberation Y is saying?
Well, they're basically saying that, with all that historical baggage, men are kind of pressured into this system that's not really in their best interests.
Okay, yeah, I see that.
They use a lot of strong language talking about how men are driven by like biological urges and societal pressure and the promise of, affection to tie the knot.
Right. They're basically saying men are getting tricked into it.
Yeah. And once they're married, they're trapped. Like, Liberation Y uses terms like wage slaves to describe how men are expected to be the primary breadwinners.
Yeah, putting their own dreams on hold, all that.
Exactly. They're sacrificing their own ambitions to support their families.
It's like they're stuck.
And then, what happens if a guy tries to leave?
Oh, yeah. What about divorce? I bet they have a lot to say about that.
Oh, they do. They claim that divorce laws are, like, completely rigged against men.
Really? In what way?
They point to things like alimony and child support payments as, like, evidence of this imbalance. They say men are left struggling, barely scraping by.
While the ex-wives are living it up.
Yeah, exactly. Maintaining a comfortable lifestyle while the guy's struggling to make ends meet.
Oh.
So that brings us to their proposed solution.
Which is?
Divorce impartiality, they call it.
Okay. So what does that mean exactly?
I say, instead of just focusing on money when couples split up, courts should consider, all the contributions to the marriage, like housework, childcare, emotional support.
Oh, okay. I see. That makes sense, I guess.
Right. They even talk about actually trying to, like, put a number on those contributions to make sure things are really, truly fair,
I don't know how you'd measure something like emotional support.
Right. That's the thing.
That's tricky.
It does. Like, imagine judges ordering people to, I don't know, keep doing chores around the house or even, like, being a companion to their ex to offset alimony payments.
Oh, okay. Now that's where I have to push back a little bit.
Go ahead.
I mean, wouldn't that be, like, incredibly difficult to actually enforce?
Yeah, I know, right?
Like, how could a court monitor something as personal as, emotional support or even more, well, I don't know, companionship?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a radical idea for sure.
Yeah, and it brings up a lot of, I don't know, like ethical questions too.
Definitely. Like, are we really going to force people to stay in relationships they don't want to be in just to avoid these debts, right?
Exactly. So while liberation-wise intentions might be, in the right place, trying to find some kind of fairness, their solution feels like it creates more problems than it solves.
For sure. It highlights this, like, fundamental challenge of trying to put a value on things that aren't, easily quantifiable.
Right. Like how much is a year of raising kids worth?
Exactly. Or, years of emotional labor.
Right. So this divorce impartiality thing,
Hmm.
it's interesting, but it also seems pretty, I don't know, like impractical.
Yeah.
Maybe even dangerous.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's definitely something to think about, though.
Definitely. And, it's not like Liberation Y stops there.
Mhm.
They take things a step further. Like, remember how they compared marriage to a cult?
Oh, yeah, that was a wild one.
Right. So, like, how do they even justify that?
Well, they talk about all the pressure to get married, like they say that from a young age, we're all bombarded with these messages about marriage being the, like, ultimate path to happiness.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's everywhere.
It is. And they see that as a form of, like, indoctrination almost,
Oh, wow.
preventing people from, really thinking for themselves and making their own choices.
So they're saying that people aren't actually choosing to get married, that they're being brainwashed into it.
Kind of, yeah. They say it's more about conforming to expectations than actually wanting to be married.
Okay.
Mhm.
So, like, are they saying love is a myth?
Not necessarily. It seems like their critique is more focused on the societal pressures around marriage and the legal and financial structures that they see as being rigged, you
Right.
know?
So it's not that they're against love or relationships. They're just really skeptical of the institution of marriage itself.
Exactly. They see it as this system that entraps men and benefits women and the state.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. It's a pretty radical viewpoint.
It is, but I think it taps into a sense of disillusionment that a lot of men feel about marriage.
Yeah, especially with, divorce rates being what they are and all the complexities of modern relationships.
Exactly. And the way they use such provocative language comparing marriage to a cult or a mafia just amplifies their message and makes it that much more, well, controversial.
For sure. It definitely makes you stop and think, like, whoa, hold on a second. Are they onto something here?
Right. It's definitely a thought-provoking perspective. But it's important to remember that this is just one viewpoint, a very, very provocative one. It's not necessarily the truth about marriage for everyone.
Right. We should be critical of what they're saying, for sure.
Absolutely. But I think it's worth, digging deeper into their arguments and seeing what we can learn from them.
Yeah, I agree. So we've talked about their view of marriage as the system that's designed to benefit women and the state at men's expense. We've looked at their arguments about financial disadvantages for men, their divorce impartiality
Mhm.
proposal, and their pretty wild comparison of marriage to a cult.
Right?
So what other, like, eyebrow-raising ideas do they have up their sleeves?
Well, one of the most interesting things they talk about is how they connect this perceived male disadvantage in marriage to a broader societal shift.
Yeah.
They talk about this idea that there's been this decline in traditional masculinity
Okay.
and that society now favors more feminine traits and values.
Interesting.
And they argue that, the shift has basically created this environment where men are increasingly marginalized, especially when it comes to marriage.
So they're saying it's not just about, like, the institution of marriage itself, but about how, like, societal values as a whole have changed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They think this shift has led to what they call, get this, the feminization of society,
Okay.
where men are no longer valued for their, traditional roles as providers and protectors.
But haven't societal roles for both, like men and women, evolved? I mean, it's not like it's the 1950s anymore,
Right,
right?
of course. But Liberation Y argues that this evolution has, gone too far.
And it's left men feeling kind of lost.
Yeah, lost and disempowered.
Okay. So let's go back to this whole cult comparison for a second.
Yeah.
Like, how do they actually, you know, justify that?
Well, they point to the intense social pressure to get married.
Oh, yeah.
They say that from a young age, people are constantly bombarded with these messages that marriage is the ultimate goal, the key to happiness, all that.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And they see that as a form of indoctrination. That keeps people from, really examining what they want and making choices that are truly their own.
I get that. Like, I know I've definitely felt that pressure.
Oh, for sure.
Like, when are you getting married? Don't you want to settle down and have a family? It's constant.
Exactly. And they argue that this pressure comes from all sides, right? Like family, friends, the media, even religious institutions.
It's like this unspoken rule.
Yeah, that everyone should just, strive for marriage no matter what, even if it's not what they really want.
Right. And if you don't, there's something wrong with you.
Exactly. And so for them, the people who choose not to get married, they're resisting the cult almost.
Interesting.
They even use this term awakened to describe those who've, rejected that pressure and chosen a different path.
So they're kind of framing themselves as like this counter movement, fighting against this
Yeah.
like brainwashing.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. They want to help men escape this system and reclaim their, masculinity and their independence.
It's a pretty powerful message, for sure. But I do have to wonder, like, is it really fair to compare marriage to a cult? I mean, I think most people get married because, they're in love
Right.
and they want to, like, build a life together.
That's a really good point. And I think, even though Liberation Y's comparison to a cult might be a little extreme, it does make us think about all the societal pressures that are at play.
Right, like, why do we do the things we do?
Exactly. Like how much of our desire to get married is actually coming from, genuine love and our own personal goals, and how much of it is because we're afraid of being judged or we just want to fit in.
That's a really, really good question.
Yeah. And I think it's something we should all ask ourselves,
For sure.
whether we're single or married or whatever.
Totally. And, it's interesting because this whole idea of, like, not just blindly following what society expects, it kind of ties back to what we were talking about earlier, with the historical stuff.
Yeah, I see that.
Like how marriage used to be this, like, economic necessity for women. And now things are different, but we're still carrying around all that baggage.
Exactly. And liberation-wise, basically saying, like, hey, wake up. Things have changed. You don't have to do things the way they've always been done.
Right. So we've talked about their critique of marriage, their alternative approach to divorce, and this whole cult comparison. What else? What are some of their other, like, key arguments?
Well, one of the things that really stands out in their content is how they address this issue of male disposability.
Male disposability. What do they mean by that?
They basically argue that society has become, like, way too tolerant of male suffering,
Okay.
and that men are often seen as, like, expendable.
Expendable. Like, what do you mean?
Like, both in the workforce and in, like, personal relationships.
Yeah.
They're saying that men are, like, more likely to end up, financially ruined after a divorce,
Yep.
more likely to lose custody of their kids, and just face more social stigma in general.
So it's like they're saying that society just kind of expects men to, like, suck it up and deal with it,
Yeah, pretty much.
and they're connecting that to marriage.
Exactly.
Okay, so how so?
They argue that this idea that men are, like, inherently stronger and more resilient,
Yeah.
it leads to this belief that they're just, like, better equipped to handle hardship.
So they're saying that that's why men get the short end of the stick in divorces.
Yeah. Because society just assumes they can take it.
That's a pretty heavy accusation. Like, do they have any, actual evidence to back that up?
Well, they often point to statistics about, like, homelessness and suicide rates,
Okay.
and even, like, workplace fatalities.
Oh, wow.
And they highlight how those issues disproportionately affect men.
So they're saying these statistics, like, prove their point.
Yeah, they see it as a reflection of a society that's become indifferent to male suffering.
It definitely sounds like they're not too optimistic about the state of things for men today.
Right. It can be pretty bleak, their message. But I think it's important to keep in mind that, they're speaking to a very specific audience,
Right, of course.
like men who are already feeling, disenfranchised.
Yeah, men who are like, hey, what about us?
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. So it sounds like they're saying that marriage is, like, one of the things that contributes to this whole male disposability problem.
Right. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier,
The legal stuff?
Yeah, the legal and financial structures around marriage.
Right.
They believe that those structures, put men at a disadvantage.
And make them more vulnerable to being, like, taken advantage of.
Exactly.
Okay. So, like, what's their solution? Are they just saying men should never get married?
They don't, like, explicitly say that,
Okay.
but they definitely urge men to be cautious,
Yeah, do your research.
Right, like, protect yourself legally and financially.
Don't just jump in blindly.
Exactly. Be aware of the potential risks.
So it's more about, like, empowering men to make informed decisions.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Okay.
Like, they want men to prioritize their own well-being.
Instead of just, like, going along with what they're supposed to do.
Exactly.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, they might be a little extreme in how they say things,
For sure.
but it sounds like their heart is in the right place,
Yeah, I think so.
They're trying to, like, look out for guys.
Right. And, even if we don't agree with everything they say, I think they raise some really important points.
Yeah, for sure. It's been a wild ride, this deep dive into liberation-wise world.
They'd have.
I mean, their take on marriage is definitely, like, thought-provoking, even a little outrageous at times.
It is. But it's important to remember that, this is just one perspective, one channel on YouTube. It's
Okay.
not necessarily representative of, how everyone feels about marriage.
Yeah. And just because they say marriage is bad doesn't mean it is.
Right.
Right.
It's complicated.
Exactly.
There are a lot of different perspectives out there.
So for everyone listening, like, what do you think? Did this deep dive, change your view on marriage at all?
Yeah. Did it make you question any of your own, like, assumptions or beliefs about relationships?
It's definitely given us a lot to think about.
It has. Regardless of whether you're single, married, whatever, I think it's worth asking yourself.
Yeah.
Like, what are your non-negotiables in a relationship?
Right. Like, what are your deal breakers?
Exactly.
What are your values and priorities when it comes to, like, love and commitment?
Those are big questions.
They are.
Yeah.
but they're important ones.
For sure.
Well, that about wraps it up for this deep dive into the world of liberation why.
It was a good one.
It was. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
See you next time.
We'll see you the next one.